The rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack of the mallet against the stubborn metal pole echoed through the otherwise quiet suburban morning. Mark grunted with each strike, sweat already beading on his forehead despite the early hour. The inflatable pool, a source of so much summer joy for his kids, had reached the end of its lifespan. A series of increasingly frustrating leaks, patched and repatched until the blue vinyl resembled a patchwork quilt, had finally convinced him it was time for its retirement. He was determined to get the dismantling done before the full heat of the day descended and, more importantly, before she noticed. She was Patricia, though everyone on the street privately referred to her as Karen. Her reputation preceded her like the scent of over-fertilized roses from her meticulously manicured front yard. Patricia had an uncanny ability to find fault with even the most innocuous of neighborly activities. Mark had endured her complaints about the height of his grass. It was within the HOA guidelines. The color of his newly painted fence, apparently, it clashed with the neighborhood's aesthetic. And the boisterous laughter of his children during their afternoon water fights, which, according to Patricia, disturbed her meditation time. The inflatable pool, a vibrant splash of blue in his otherwise earth-toned backyard, had been a silent point of contention for the past 2 summers. He'd overheard her muttering to a visiting friend about it once, something about it being tacky and lowering property values. Mark tightened his grip on the mallet, focusing on dislodging the last stubborn support beam. He strategically started the takedown early, hoping to have the deflated remnants discreetly rolled up and tucked away in the garage before Patricia embarked on her daily neighborhood surveillance walk, a ritual as predictable as the sunrise. He knew that the sight of the pool being dismantled would likely trigger some sort of commentary, and he simply didn't have the energy for a confrontation. He just wanted to get it done, dispose of it responsibly, and perhaps even look into a slightly less offensive water feature for the kids next year. Maybe a small, tasteful fountain. Though, knowing Patricia, even that might elicit a complaint about water wastage. He finally wrestled the last pole free, and the inflatable ring of the pool sagged dramatically. A small puff of trapped air escaped with a sigh. Mark allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. Phase 1 complete. Now came the less noisy part, deflating the main body of the pool. He located the valve and began the slow process, the thick plastic folding in on itself like a tired lung. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across his lawn. He could hear the distant chirping of birds and the faint hum of a lawnmower a few streets over. So far, so good. No sign of Patricia. Just as the pool was almost completely flat, he heard it. The unmistakable click of her garden gate. Mark's shoulders slumped imperceptibly. He should have known his luck wouldn't hold. He glanced up, feigning absorption in the deflated pool as Patricia, dressed in her usual crisp white tennis outfit despite the fact he'd never seen her actually play tennis, strolled purposefully down her driveway towards the sidewalk. Her eyes, however, were already fixed on his backyard. He braced himself, a familiar knot of annoyance tightening in his stomach. He just wanted to dismantle an old pool in peace. Is that too much to ask? Apparently, in Patricia's neighborhood, it was. He could feel her gaze intensifying, and he knew the inevitable was about to happen. The silence stretched thick and expectant before Patricia's voice, sharp and laced with a familiar disapproval, finally cut through the morning air. "Mark," Patricia's voice called out, each syllable perfectly enunciated, carrying the weight of her disapproval across the manicured lawns that separated their properties. She hadn't stopped walking, but her attention was laser-focused on the deflating pool. "I say, Mark, what exactly are you doing?" Mark straightened up, forcing a neutral expression onto his face. He knew any hint of defensiveness would only fuel her fire. "Morning, Patricia," he replied, trying to keep his tone even. "Just taking down the old pool. It had a few too many leaks." Patricia finally halted at the edge of his driveway, her arms crossed over her chest. Her gaze swept over the flattened blue vinyl as if it were a crime scene. "Taking it down," she repeated, her voice rising slightly. "But summer has barely begun. The children, they enjoy that pool." "They do," Mark agreed, bending down to wrestle with a particularly stubborn fold of plastic. "But it was beyond repair. Safety first, you know." He deliberately avoided eye contact, hoping to signal that the conversation was over. But Patricia was not easily deterred. "Safety? Really, Mark? I haven't noticed any safety issues. In fact, it always seemed perfectly adequate." There was a subtle emphasis on the word adequate, a clear indication of her true feelings about the inflatable eyesore. Mark sighed inwardly. Here we go. He stood up again, holding a tangled section of the pool. Well, it was losing air constantly. I was having to pump it up every day. It was more trouble than it was worth. Perhaps Patricia conceded, but her tone suggested she didn't believe him for a second. But surely a simple repair would have sufficed. These things are quite durable these days. Mark resisted the urge to point out the numerous mismatched patches that marred the pool's surface. "I tried, Patricia, Believe me, I tried. It was time for it to go. He started to roll the deflated pool, a cumbersome task. Patricia watched his efforts with a critical eye. And what, pray tell, are your plans now? Will the children have nothing to cool off in during these hot summer months? Her voice dripped with a fox concern that Mark found particularly grating. We'll figure something out, Mark said shortly, managing to get a significant portion of the pool rolled up. He was eager to get it into the garage and out of her sightline. Hemph, Patricia huffed a sound that spoke volumes. I just hope whatever you replace it with is more in keeping with the neighborhood's standards. She cast a pointed glance at his slightly overgrown rose bushes. Mark bit back a sharp retort. He wasn't about to get drawn into a debate about his landscaping choices. Duly noted, Patricia, he said, his voice tight. He hefted the rolled-up pool, which was heavier and more awkward than he anticipated. And the disposal? Patricia continued, her interrogation showing no signs of abating. Are you simply going to leave that refused by the curb for anyone to see? Mark's patience was wearing thin. No, Patricia, he said, forcing a smile. I plan to take it to the recycling center. I'm very conscious of keeping the neighborhood looking its best. He emphasized the last part, hoping the sarcasm landed. Patricia seemed oblivious. Well, that's responsible, I suppose. She still didn't sound convinced. It's just that, well, that pool was rather prominent. Mark finally managed to maneuver the bulky roll towards his garage. Yes, well, he said, his back to her. It served its purpose. He could feel her eyes boring into his back as he struggled with the garage door. I just hope, Patricia called out, her voice taking on a more self-righteous tone, that you consider the impact these impulsive decisions have on the overall aesthetic of our community in the future. Mark finally got the garage door open and unceremoniously dumped the deflated pool inside. He turned back to face Patricia, who was still standing at the edge of his driveway, a look of profound disapproval etched on her face. He took a deep breath, preparing himself for whatever lecture was about to ensue. This was far from over. Patricia advanced a few steps onto Mark's property, her gaze now fixed on the empty patch of lawn where the pool had once been. It was a perfectly ordinary patch of slightly flattened grass, but to Patricia, it seemed to represent a void, a disruption in the harmonious tapestry of their suburban enclave. You know, Mark, she began, her voice softer now, but no less accusatory. It's not just about the visual aspect. It's about the principle of the thing. Mark leaned against his garage door frame, crossing his arms. He was trying to remain calm, but a low-level hum of irritation was building within him. Principle, he echoed, raising an eyebrow. What principle is that, Patricia? The principle of consideration, she declared, as if revealing a profound truth. We all have a responsibility to maintain a certain standard, a level of decorum. These things, she gestured vaguely at his backyard, they affect us all. Mark resisted the urge to point out that his children's laughter had likely affected her meditation time far more than a deflated pool ever could. With all due respect, Patricia, he said, trying to keep his tone measured, it was my pool in my backyard. I hardly think its removal is a matter of community-wide concern. Patricia scoffed. Oh, but it is. We all chose to live in this neighborhood for a reason, Mark. For the sense of order of the shared values. Shared values. Mark interjected, a hint of disbelief creeping into his voice. Like everyone having the exact same taste in outdoor recreational equipment? Patricia ignored his sarcasm. It's about maintaining property values, Mark. A neighborhood is only as strong as its weakest link. And frankly, she paused, lowering her voice as if sharing a scandalous secret. That pool, well, it wasn't exactly enhancing our curb appeal. Mark stared at her, momentarily speechless. Curb appeal? It was in his backyard. Who was even seeing it besides the occasional squirrel and maybe the birds in the oak tree? Patricia, he said slowly, trying to choose his words carefully. I appreciate your concern, but I really don't see how taking down an old, broken pool diminishes anyone's property value. It's the precedent it sets, Mark, she exclaimed, throwing her hands up in exasperation. Today it's an inflatable pool. Tomorrow it's, who knows, a collection of gnomes, a brightly colored trampoline. We have standards here. Mark's jaw tightened. He had a perfectly respectable, albeit slightly weathered, set of garden gnomes tucked away amongst his hostas. He suddenly felt a surge of protectiveness towards them. My kids enjoyed that pool, he said, his voice hardening slightly. It brought them a lot of joy during the summer. And frankly, Patricia, what goes on in my backyard is really none of your business as long as it's within the EJOA guidelines, which it was. Patricia's eyes narrowed. Are you suggesting I'm being nosy? I'm suggesting, Mark replied, trying to keep his voice level despite the rising tide of his annoyance, that perhaps you could focus on your own lovely garden and leave me to manage my own property. A tense silence hung in the air between them. Patricia's face flushed slightly and her lips pressed into a thin line. Mark braced himself for the inevitable escalation. He knew Patricia wasn't one to back down easily. This was likely just the opening salvo in what promised to be a protracted neighborhood drama, all because of a deflated inflatable pool. He wondered if he should have just left the leaky thing to slowly disintegrate on its own. It certainly would have been less confrontational. But no, he tried to be responsible. And for his trouble, he was now facing the wrath of Karen. The silence stretched thick with unspoken accusations and simmering resentment. Patricia finally broke it with a dramatic sigh. "Very well, Mark," she said, her voice dripping with martyrdom. "If that's your attitude. But don't come crying to me when the neighborhood association starts sending out notices about declining aesthetic standards." With that, she executed a sharp about-face and marched back towards her own pristine property, her white tennis skirt swaying with each rigid step. Mark watched her go, a mixture of relief and exasperation washing over him. He had hoped that would be the end of it, but he knew Patricia. This was likely just a tactical retreat. She would regroup, reassess, and probably find another avenue to express her displeasure. He wouldn't be surprised if an anonymous complaint about unsightly debris mysteriously appeared on his doorstep within the week. He spent the rest of the morning finishing the pool, dismantling and carefully packing the deflated vinyl and metal poles into the back of his truck. He made a point of doing it slowly and deliberately, half expecting Patricia to reappear with further commentary. But thankfully, she remained out of sight, presumably tending to her award-winning roses or perhaps drafting a strongly worded email to the HOA. Later that afternoon, as Mark was enjoying a rare moment of peace in his backyard, the kids playing quietly with their Lego, his phone buzzed with a notification. It was a group text from the neighborhood WhatsApp chat. Usually it was filled with mundane updates about lost pets or upcoming block parties. But this message was different. It was a screenshot of a photo, and Mark's blood ran cold as he recognized the subject. It was a picture taken from an angle that clearly showed his backyard, focusing on the patch of slightly flattened grass where the pool had been. The caption read, "Notice the unsightly discoloration and damage to the lawn caused by the previous water feature at Mark's address. This is precisely the kind of negligence that detracts from our community's appeal." The message was signed a concerned resident. Mark instantly knew who the concerned resident was. Patricia. She hadn't confronted him directly again, but she had clearly taken her grievance public, weaponizing the neighborhood chat against him. A flurry of replies started appearing beneath the photo. Some were neutral, asking for clarification, but a few echoed Patricia's sentiments, expressing concern about maintaining property values and the overall look of the neighborhood. Mark felt a surge of anger mixed with a weary resignation. He hadn't wanted any drama. He had simply wanted to take down a broken pool. Now, thanks to Patricia, he was being publicly shamed in front of his neighbors. He knew he couldn't let this slide. He typed out a calm but firm response, explaining that the pool was old and had been removed, and that the grass would recover quickly. He deliberately avoided naming Patricia, hoping to de-escalate the situation. But Patricia wasn't done. A few minutes later, another message appeared in the chat, this time directly addressing Mark. "Mark," it read, "it's not just the lawn. It's the principle, as I said. We have standards to uphold. Perhaps next time you'll consider the impact of your projects on the rest of us before you proceed." Mark stared at his phone, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He could feel his temper rising. He wanted to unleash a torrent of sarcastic remarks to call her out on her petty obsession with his backyard. But he knew that would only fuel the fire. He took a deep breath and typed a short, polite reply. "Understood, Patricia. Thanks for your concern." He put his phone down, feeling a knot of frustration in his chest. He knew this wasn't over. Patricia had drawn a line in the sand, and the battle of the backyard aesthetics had officially begun. He just hoped he had enough metaphorical ammunition to survive it. The aftermath of Patricia's WhatsApp campaign was a subtle but persistent chill in the neighborhood dynamics. Some neighbors, those who had always seemed a little intimidated by Patricia's pronouncements, offered Mark polite but slightly distant nods. Others, those who had privately rolled their eyes at her overzealousness for years, offered him sympathetic smiles and whispered assurances that they thought the pool had been fun for the kids. Mark decided to take the high road. He diligently watered the slightly discolored patch of grass, and within a week it was barely noticeable. He even planted a small, tasteful bird bath in its place, hoping the gentle splashing would be more to Patricia's liking. He made a conscious effort to be friendly to everyone, including Patricia, offering a polite good morning whenever their paths crossed, though she usually responded with a curt nod and a tight-lipped expression. However, Patricia wasn't one to let things go. A few weeks later, Mark received an official-looking letter from the HOA. It cited a minor infraction. His trash cans had apparently been left out on the curb for slightly longer than the allowed time frame after collection. Mark knew it was Patricia. There was no other explanation for such a petty complaint. He rectified the situation immediately, but the message was clear. She was keeping an eye on him. Summer continued, and Mark focused on spending time with his kids, finding alternative ways for them to cool off, like trips to the local splash pad and water balloon fights that he made sure stayed within the confines of his own yard. He even considered getting a smaller, more discreet inflatable pool, but the thought of reigniting the conflict with Patricia made him hesitate. Then came the neighborhood barbecue. It was an annual event, usually a relaxed and friendly gathering. Mark and his family attended, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. Most people were welcoming, but Patricia remained aloof, pointedly ignoring Mark and engaging in animated conversations with other neighbors, occasionally casting veiled glances in his direction. Later in the evening, as the kids were playing tag in the fading light, Mark found himself standing near Patricia, who was meticulously arranging a platter of fruit. He took a deep breath and decided to try and clear the air, or at least establish a truce. "Patricia," he began, his voice calm, "about the pool." Patricia stiffened, her back to him. "I think we said all that needs to be said, Mark." "Maybe," Mark conceded, "but I just wanted to say that I wasn't trying to offend anyone. The pool was old and it needed to go. That's all there was to it." Patricia finally turned to face him, her expression still cool. "It's about more than just a pool, Mark. It's about respecting the standards of our community." "And I do respect the community," Mark replied. "That's why I took the pool down when it became an eyesore. I'm trying to be a good neighbor." A flicker of something, perhaps surprise, perhaps a grudging acknowledgement, crossed Patricia's face. She hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "Well," she said, her tone softening slightly, "I suppose it's good that you removed it responsibly." It wasn't a full apology, but it was a start. Over the next few months, the tension between them slowly eased. Patricia didn't suddenly become Mark's best friend, but the petty complaints stopped. Perhaps she realized that her campaign had garnered more eye rolls than support. Or perhaps, Mark hoped, she simply ran out of minor infractions to report. The following summer, Mark invested in a small, above-ground pool with a tasteful wooden surround. It was less obtrusive, more in line with the neighborhood aesthetic, and most importantly, it didn't elicit a single complaint from Patricia. As his kids splashed and laughed in their new pool, Mark couldn't help but smile. He had survived the great inflatable pool incident and, in the process, learned that sometimes even the most formidable Karens could be weathered with a little patience and a commitment to keeping your backyard mostly inoffensive.